Reading lesson 119, video part 2. I want you to keep these in mind for today's reading. Here's your comprehension questions. How did Tom and Huck surprise the adults? How did Tom figure out where to dig for the treasure in the cave? At first, why did the Welshman think the treasure was just a pile of cold metal, old metal? Why did the widow Douglas want to adopt Huck? Do you think Huck will like living with the widow Douglas? Explain your answer. Keep these questions in mind for today's reading. If you hear the answer to these, feel free to pause the video and write them down, and then continue the reading. Your writing for today. In this chapter, Tom told the adults the story of the treasure. Tell the story of the treasure in your own words. Begin with the boys treasure hunting. Try to answer the following questions. Why did the boys decide to go to treasure hunting? What did the boys see and hear in the haunted house? What was their plan for finding the treasure? How did Huck follow that plan? How did Tom follow that plan? How did the boys finally find the treasure? Make your story at least 100 words long. Now, let us begin today's reading. Chapter 29, Floods of Gold. Tom went first, cutting crude steps in the clay hill as he descended. Huck followed. The boys found some blankets spread near the rock. They also found an old suspender with some bacon rind and the well-gnawed bones of 2 or 3 birds. But there was no money box. The lads searched all around, but in vain. Tom said, "He said under the cross. It can't be under the rock itself because that rock sits solidly on the ground." They searched everywhere once more, and they sat down discouraged. Huck could suggest nothing. By and by, Tom said, "Looky here, Huck. There's footprints and some candle grease on the clay on one side of the rock, but not on the other sides." "Now what's that for?" "I bet you the money is under the rock. I'm going to dig in the clay." "That ain't a bad idea, Tom," said Huck. Tom's knife was out at once, and he had not dug 4 inches before he struck wood. "Hey, Huck! You hear that?" Huck began to dig and scratch now. Some boards were soon uncovered and removed. The boards had concealed a passage that led under the rock. Tom got into this passage and held his candle as far as under the rock as he could, but he could not see, to the end of the passage. He proposed to explore. The narrow passage descended gradually. Tom followed its winding course, first to the right, then to the left, with Huck at his heels. Tom turned a short curve by and by and exclaimed, "My goodness, Huck, looky here!" It was the treasure box, soon enough. Let me fix this, sorry. It was the treasure box, soon enough, occupying a snug little cavern along with an empty powder keg and a couple of guns in leather cases, 2 or 3 pairs of old shoes, a leather belt, and some other rubbish, well soaked with water. "Got it at last," said Huck, plowing among the coins with his hand. "My, but we're rich, Tom." "Huck, I always reckoned we'd get it. It's just too good to believe, but we have got it. Say, let's not fool around here. Let's drag it out. Let me see if I can lift the box." It weighed about 50 pounds. Tom could lift it, but he could not carry it. "I thought so," he said. They carried it like it was heavy that day at the haunted house. I noticed that. I reckon I was right to think of bringing these little bags along. The money was soon in the bags, and the boys took it up to the rock with the cross. Now let's fetch the guns and things, said Huck. No, Huck, leave them here. They're just the things to have when we go robbing. We'll keep them there all the time, and we'll hold our parties there too. It's an awful snug place for parties. What parties? I don't know, but robbers always have parties, and of course we've got to have them too. Come along, Huck. We've been in here a long time. It's getting late. I reckon I'm hungry too. Well, we'll eat when we get to the skiff. Tom and Huck soon came out behind the clump of bushes, looked out, found the coast clear, and began descending to the skiff. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, they pushed out and got underway. Tom skimmed up the shore through the long twilight, chatting cheerily with Huck, and they landed shortly after dark. Now, Huck, said Tom, we'll hide the money in the loft of the widow's woodshed. I'll come up in the morning, and we'll count it and divide it. Then we'll hunt up a place out in the woods to hide it. Just you lay quiet here and watch the stuff till I run and grab Benny Taylor's little wagon. I won't be gone a minute. Tom disappeared and presently returned with the wagon. The boys put the 2 small sacks into the wagon, threw some old rags on top of them, and started off, dragging the wagon behind them. When they reached the Welshman's house, they stopped to rest. Just as they were about to move on, the Welshman stepped out and said, Hello, who's that? Huck and Tom. Good, come along with me, boys. You're keeping everybody waiting. Here, hurry up, trot ahead. I'll haul the wagon for you. Why, it's not as light as it looks. Got bricks in it, or metal, or old metal? Old metal, said Tom. I judge so. The boys in this town will take more trouble and fool away more time hunting up $1's worth of old iron to sell to the foundry. But that's human nature. Hurry along, hurry along. The boys wanted to know what the hurry was about. Never mind, you'll see when we get to the Widow Douglas's, Huck said with some worry. Mr. Jones, we haven't been doing nothing bad. The Welshman laughed. Well, I don't know, Huck. I don't know about that. Ain't you and the widow good friends? Yes. Well, she's been good friends to me always. All right, then. What do you want to be afraid for? That question was not answered in Huck's mind before he found himself pushed, along with Tom, into Miss Douglas's living room. Mr. Jones left the wagon near the door and followed. The place was grandly lighted, and everybody of any importance in the village was there. The Thatchers were there, and the Harpers, the Rogers family, Aunt Polly, Sid, the minister, the editor, and a great many more, and they were all dressed in their best clothes. The widow received the boys as heartily as anyone could receive 2 ragged beings. The boys were covered with clay and candle wax. Aunt Polly blushed, and she frowned and shook her head at Tom. Nobody suffered half as much as the 2 boys did, however. The Welshman said, Tom wasn't at home yet, so I gave up, but I stumbled on him and Huck right at my door, and so I just brought them along in a hurry. And you did just right, said the widow. Come with me, boys. She took them to a bedroom and said, Now, wash and dress yourselves. Here are 2 new suits of clothes, shirts, socks, everything complete. They belong to Huck. I bought 1 suit, and the Welshman bought the other. But they'll fit both of you. Get into them. We'll wait. Come down when you're all slicked up enough. Then the widow left. Huck said, Tom, we can't run off if we can find a rope. Huck said, Tom, we can run off if we can find a rope. The window ain't high from the ground. Shucks, what do you want to run off for? Well, I ain't used to that kind of a crowd. I can't stand it. I ain't going down there, Tom. Oh, it ain't anything. I don't mind it a bit. I'll take care of you. Sid appeared. Tom, he said, Auntie has been waiting for you all afternoon. She got your Sunday clothes ready, and everybody's been fretting about you. Say, ain't this grease and clay on your clothes? Now, Mr. City, you just tend to your own business. What's all this about? It's one of the widow's parties that she's always having. Seems she's going to make some kind of announcement about Huck. I don't know what it's all about. Some minutes later, the widow's guests were at the supper table. A dozen children were propped up at little side tables in the same room. The guests began to eat. At the proper time, the widow Douglas rose up to make her announcement. The widow said, "As you know, I have been taking care of Huck for the past few weeks. I have become very fond of him, and I have decided to adopt him." Huck's jaw dropped. He could say nothing. The other guests were excited by this news. The widow continued to speak. She heaped so many compliments upon Huck that she almost forgot the discomfort of his new clothes in the discomfort of her praise. The widow said she meant to give Huck a home under her roof and have him educated. When she could spare the money, she would start him in business in a modest way. Tom's chance had come. Tom said, Huck don't need any money. Huck's rich." Nothing but good manners of the company kept back a laugh at this pleasant joke. But the silence was a little awkward. Tom broke it. "Huck's got money. Maybe you don't believe it, but he's got lots of it. Oh, you needn't smile. I reckon I can show you. You just wait a minute." Tom ran out. The company looked at each other with a perplexed interest. "Sid, what ails Tom?" said Aunt Polly. I can never figure that boy out. Tom entered, struggling with the weight of the sacks, and Aunt Polly did not finish her sentence. Tom poured the mass of yellow coins onto the table and said, "There. What did I tell you? Half of it's Huck's, half of it's mine." Here we go. The scene took everybody's breath away. All gazed and nobody spoke for a moment. Then there was a general call for an explanation. Tom said he could furnish it, and he did. The tale was long but full of interest. There was not a single interruption to break its flow. When Tom had finished, the widow Douglas said, "I thought I had fixed up a little surprise for this occasion, but this surprise makes mine seem mighty small." The money was counted. The sum amounted to a little over $12,000. It was more than anyone present had ever seen at one time before. And that concludes the reading. Don't forget to do Logic Part D. Write the answer for items 1 and 2. Here are 3 rules of logic. Rule 1. Just because 2 events happen around the same time doesn't mean one event causes the other event. Rule 2. Just because you know about a part doesn't mean you know about the whole thing. Rule 3. Just because you know about one part doesn't mean you know about another part. Here's a statement. I started reading a book of short stories yesterday. The first story was about a boy who made donuts. I'm sure the next story will also be about donuts. Which rule does the argument break? For this. So he read one story, and then he's going to read another one, and it assumes it will also be about donuts. Would that be Rule 1, Rule 2, or Rule 3? Hint, it's not Rule 1. Here's another statement. About a month ago, I went into a bookstore, and it started raining. Then, a couple of weeks ago, I went into another bookstore, and it started raining. I don't think I'll go into any bookstores today because I didn't bring my umbrella. Which rule does that argument break? Rule 1, Rule 2, or Rule 3? I'll repeat the comprehension questions for you. How did Tom and Huck surprise the adults? How did Tom figure out where to dig for the treasure in the cave? At first, why did the Welshman think the treasure was just a pile of old metal? Why did the widow Douglas want to adopt Huck? And do you think Huck will like living with the widow Douglas? Explain your answer. And that concludes chapter 119. Get busy.